In the turbid stream of political life, a conscientious man must endeavor to do justice to all, and to return good for evil. But he must always expect evil in return.
Those are the words of John Quincy Adams, our sixth president, and the main subject of this, the sixth episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Dead Presidents Podcast. I'm here with my very good friend James J. Hamilton.
And I'm here with my friend Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And we're here to bring you another informative and enlightening episode
we are
on
entering
our nation's dead presidents.
Entering the second generation of presidents. Era. Starting off with the literal son of an earlier president.
Yeah. One of the things that was sort of feared at the beginning, and the first time it happened was pretty early on.
And, the first president who had a son, that son became president.
Yeah.
Although he certainly didn't go in there on his father's coattails.
No, certainly not.
He earned his way in.
He certainly made his own way. And it will be quite interesting to dive into that. But first, we got a pretty beefy top 5 this week.
Pretty virile, athletic presidents.
That's right. We're going to go into the top 5 most athletic presidents.
Number 5.
Dwight Eisenhower. As a young man, Eisenhower was very passionate about sports, and the playing field was where he first discovered his talents as a leader. He went to West Point, played college football for the Army. Running back, linebacker. The New York Times described him as one of the most promising backs in Eastern football. In 1912, Army played against Carlisle Indian School, whose star player was Jim Thorpe, who had just won Olympic gold medals in the decathlon and the pentathlon. There was a whole book about this game called Carlisle versus Army, the forgotten story of football's greatest battle. Eisenhower wanted to hit Thorpe hard and knock him out of the game. He laid a big hit on him, but Thorpe got right up and shook it off. Late in the game, Eisenhower got juked by Thorpe and collided with another Army player, suffering a knee injury that knocked him out of the game, ended his football career, and threatened his military career. Kind of a hairy situation there.
Yep, Thorpe turned the tables on him.
Sure did. At one point, Thorpe had a 92-yard touchdown run called back by penalty, and on the next play, ran for a 97-yard touchdown. Carlisle won the game 27-6 and went on to win the college national championship. But Thorpe later remembered Eisenhower as a good linebacker. Eisenhower remembered Thorpe as the greatest football player who he ever saw. Eisenhower was the only president to go head-to-head with the world's greatest athlete. And he barely lived to tell the tale.
Yeah, the Olympic decathlon winner is, I think, traditionally called the greatest athlete in the world. Jim Thorpe, multiple sport athlete. He played Major League Baseball, I think, and football. Obviously, he was total badass, totally dominant. Young Dwight Eisenhower going head-to-head with him, standing on the highest stages of certainly football at the time. Pre-NFL.
Right.
The Carlisle Indian School, I think, was undefeated and won the national championship that year. They're the best football team in the world. Our future president holding his own a little bit.
Eisenhower would become a football coach on Army bases, and many people compared his leadership style as a general to a football coach. He would write, "I believe that football, perhaps more than any other sport, tends to instill in men the feeling that victory comes through hard, almost slavish work, team play, self-confidence, and an enthusiasm that amounts to dedication." Eisenhower was also an avid golfer throughout his presidency and usually scored in the 80s.
Pretty
in
good.
1968, of course, he made a legendary hole-in-one at the Seven Lakes Country Club.
Yep. One of his life's proudest achievements. Right up there with defeating the Nazis. There's a hole-in-one.
Sunk that hole-in-one. And that's going to bring us right up to top 5 most athletic president.
Number 4.
Abraham Lincoln.
Now, our 45th president may be in the WWE Hall of Fame, but it's our 16th president who is the true wrestling legend. Young, honest Abe was 6'4", weighed in at 214 pounds, and he possessed a great strength, honed through hard work with an axe, earning his later nickname, the Rail Splitter.
Yeah.
I think that'd be his WWE finishing move.
Yeah, the Rail Splitter. Yeah, that would be.
Good God! Good God almighty, Lincoln got him with the Rail Splitter!
He's killed him!
It's over!
He's dead!
Solid finishing maneuver.
At age 22, Lincoln lived in the hardscrabble frontier town of New Salem, Illinois, where men had to be tough and physical strength was valued. The neighboring town of Clary's Grove had a wild gang of roughnecks led by Jack Armstrong, a bull of a man, and a showdown developed when Lincoln got a job in a store owned by Denton Offutt. Here's the story as told by David Herbert Donald in his classic Lincoln biography.
Highly recommended book, by the way.
When Offutt, enchanted with his new assistant, began boasting that Lincoln was not merely the smartest man in New Salem, but also the strongest, the Clary's Grove boys called his bluff. They cared not at all about Lincoln's mental superiority, but they dared him to test his strength in a wrestling match with their champion, Jack Armstrong. Lincoln was reluctant because he said he did not like all the wooling and pulling of a wrestling match, but the urging of his employer and the taunts of his rivals obliged him to fight. In the collective memory of New Salem residents, the contest was an epic one, and various versions survived. How Armstrong defeated Lincoln through a trick, how Lincoln threw Armstrong, how Armstrong's followers threatened to collectively lick the man who had defeated their champion until Lincoln volunteered to take them all on one at a time.
Wow.
The details were irrelevant. What mattered was that Lincoln proved that he had immense strength and courage, and that was enough to win the admiration of the Clary's Grove gang. Thereafter, they became Lincoln's most loyal and enthusiastic admirers.
That's pretty badass.
No.
Standing up for himself, and like he was nothing to laugh at. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
6'4", 214 pounds. Like
he was wiry.
Yeah.
I'll bet.
he was tough.
My
He was.
God.
There's another story told by Carl Sandburg. A crowd was watching two other men wrestle when Lincoln asserted his dominance and his willingness to take on all comers. Quote, the ring of the crowd was broken when Abe shouldered his way through, stepped out, and took hold of one wrestler and threw him out of the center of the fight ring. Then, so they said, Abe Lincoln called out, I'm the big buck of this lick.
Wow.
His eyes sweeping the circle of the crowd, he challenged, if any of you want to try it, come on and wet your horns.
Strong words from a strong man.
That's Lincoln, man.
Absolutely.
Wrestling
it is.
champion. I think he was supposedly undefeated as a wrestler for a long time. Then I think it was during the Black Hawk War. He went up against someone else who beat him. He later told the story that he had been an undefeated wrestler until he fought a big grizzly of a man, as he put it.
Yeah.
But
There, I think in John Ford's Young Lincoln with Henry Fonda, I'm pretty sure there is like that scene where he wrestles that fella.
Yeah, just like, Eisenhower on the football field, Lincoln in the wrestling ring, a good proving ground for young men who will go on to excel.
That's for sure. And that's going to bring us to top 5 presidential athlete.
Number 3.
George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush grew up in a family that strove for competitive excellence, and sports were considered an important character-building arena. Bush went far in athletics, becoming the captain of the Yale baseball team and playing in the first 2 College World Series. Bush idolized Lou Gehrig as the ideal sportsman and followed in the footsteps of the Iron Horse by starting every game during his 3-year career, even if he had to play through injury. He played first base and was the team's best fielder. The Associated Press once called him a fielding artist. He was an average hitter, but developed more power in his senior year. In one game, he had a single, a double, a triple, scored 2 runs, and had 3 RBIs. He later recalled that some scouts approached him as he left the field. However, that was the first and last nibble he ever got from the pros. He never achieved his dream of playing in the major leagues, but 3 of his Yale teammates did, and 9 played in the minors. Bush held his own alongside these world-class athletes and served as their captain. He led his team to the College World Series in 1947 and 1948, and though they unfortunately lost both times, the opposing coach said of Bush, he was an excellent fielder and a tough out. I'd put him on my all-time opponent team. During his senior year, Bush got to meet the great Bambino himself, Babe Ruth. He later recalled, meeting Babe Ruth on Yale Field was a thrill that stays with me to this day. He was cancer-riddled. His voice was more of a croak than a normal voice, but he radiated greatness, and I was privileged to have been asked to go out to home plate with him to receive his papers that he denoted to Yale. Bush was also an avid skydiver. He first parachuted in the Navy in 1944, but after his presidency, he took it up as a hobby. He was something of a daredevil.
Yeah.
Old George H.W. He celebrated his 75th birthday by jumping out of an airplane and did the same for every 5th birthday thereafter, up to and including his 90th birthday.
He was basically confined to a wheelchair, but that didn't stop him from jumping out of a plane.
Wow. That takes some gumption.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of gumption,
wow,
we're on to top 5 most athletic president.
Number 2.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Diagnosed with asthma as a young boy, Roosevelt determined to overcome his physical weakness through intense training.
Yeah, we have to say, and it should be absolutely stressed, that he was a frail, sick, weakly boy.
Yeah,
with
but he
bad eyesight, and he had some things to overcome.
Yeah, he didn't accept that as his lot and was determined to work through it. He started going to the gym every day for a strenuous bodybuilding regimen, and he took up boxing. He and his brother, quote, took delight in blackening each other's eyes in boxing matches. TR was known to possess, quote, a wicked right hand. He went to Harvard in 1879. He entered the Harvard Athletic Association's boxing championship, hoping to impress his future wife Alice, who was in attendance. In the semifinals, he easily defeated his opponent, W.W. Coolidge, who had already received, quote, a tremendous thrashing from TR the previous year. Oof. But in the finals, TR faced the defending champion, C.S. Hanks, who had a much longer reach and better eyesight. TR had to fight without his glasses.
Right.
A spectator recalled the legendary match. We witnessed more than a spirited contest. Owing to an innocent mistake of Mr. Hanks, we saw that prophetic flash of the Roosevelt that was to come. Time was called on a round. Roosevelt dropped his guard, and Hanks landed a heavy blow on his nose, which spurted blood. Loud hoots and hisses from the gallery and floor were set up, whereat Roosevelt's arm was instantly flung out to command silence. It's all right, he assured us eagerly. He didn't hear him. With bleeding nose, he walked up to Hanks and shook hands with him. Hanks said good-naturedly, hadn't we better stop? Roosevelt shook his head like a terrier, bared his teeth, and began punching again. The rest of the bout was, quote, distinctly gory.
Wow.
It was plain that the smaller Roosevelt was outclassed. It was no fight at all, one student remembered. You should have seen that little fellow staggering about, banging the air. Hanks couldn't put him out, and Roosevelt wouldn't give up. It wasn't a fight, but oh, he showed himself a fighter.
Oh, he was a scrapper.
He certainly was.
I mean, he maybe he lacked some of the technical skill of Hanks, but my God, he hung in there.
He took a licking.
Yeah.
For TR, fighting, though, was not just a young man's game. As New York governor, he would wrestle several times a week with the nation's middleweight wrestling champion, just for exercise. He had to give up wrestling, though, after he broke 2 ribs and separated a shoulder. He switched back to boxing. Teddy Roosevelt boxed in the White House as a sitting president.
Yeah.
He wrote in his autobiography, "While president, I used to box with some of the aides. After a few years, I had to abandon boxing as well as wrestling, for in one bout, a young captain of artillery cross-countered me on the eye, and the blow smashed the little blood vessels. Fortunately, it was my left eye, but the sight has been dim ever since, and if it had been the right eye, I should have been entirely unable to shoot.
Wow.
Accordingly, I thought it better to acknowledge that I had become an elderly man and would have to stop boxing. I then took up jiu-jitsu for a year or 2.
Yeah, so that's his decision. It's like, well,
Need to tone it down.
I got kind of like partially blinded in my left eye, so I shouldn't box anymore. Oh, I know, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
As one would, you know.
He was also a big game hunter, mountain climber, naturalist, and explorer.
Traveler.
Explorist. Upon leaving the White House, he went on a year-long African safari where his expedition collected over 11,000 animal specimens for the Smithsonian. In 1913 and 14, he went on a grueling 5-month expedition into the uncharted Brazilian rainforest.
Yeah, and he nearly died. This nearly did him in, but my God, tenacity. Mm. It could have been tenacity. That was the T in
Indeed.
TR.
He suffered a leg wound that got infected. He became delirious with 103-degree tropical fever, while also suffering severe chest pains from the would-be assassin's bullet still lodged in his chest.
Yep. As our listeners will recall, episode 4's top 5, failed assassin number 2, John Schrank.
Yeah, 3 other members of the expedition died, but TR powered through and made it home, losing 50 pounds in the process. One of the most epic feats of physical endurance by a president.
Absolutely, hands down. Just raw strength in that man.
Total badassery.
Absolutely, and that's going to bring us to top 5 presidential athlete.
Number 1.
Gerald Ford. President Ford was unfairly saddled with the reputation of being clumsy when he fell down some stairs on camera. That baseless smear obscures his well-deserved place as the most athletic president in American history. Ford was the star captain of his high school football team and attracted the attention of college recruiters. He went to the University of Michigan, go Blue, where he played center, linebacker, and long snapper. In 1932 and 1933, Ford helped lead the Wolverines to 2 consecutive undefeated seasons and national championship titles. In his senior year of 1934, however, the team won only 1 game. But they voted Ford their MVP because they felt Jerry was one guy who would stay and fight in a losing cause. That year they played heavily favored Minnesota, the eventual undefeated national champion, and valiantly held them scoreless in the first half. An assistant coach recalled, "When I walked into the dressing room at halftime, I had tears in my eyes, and I was so proud of them." Ford and Cedric Sweet played their hearts out. They were everywhere on defense. Ford later recalled, "During 25 years in the rough and tumble world of politics, I often thought of my experiences before, during, and after that game in 1934. Remembering them has helped me many times to face a tough situation, take action, and make every effort possible despite adverse odds." Ford became the only future president to tackle a Heisman Trophy winner when he took down Chicago's Jay Berwinger and was left with a bloody cut and a scar for his trouble. Ford was on the 1935 college all-star team that played at Soldier Field against the Chicago Bears, who squeaked out a 5-0 win. After college, Ford received offers from the Detroit Lions and Green Bay Packers to play in the NFL. He turned them down and decided to go to law school at Yale, where he served as an assistant football coach. Michigan later retired Ford's number 48. When he was president, he often had the band play Hail to the Victors instead of Hail to the Chief, which is just dope in my
Michigan
opinion.
fight song.
The best fight song in college football. Ford joined the Navy in 1942, where he served as a physical fitness instructor and athletic director before fighting in the Pacific Theater of World War II. As president, he was still in good physical shape and regularly engaged in swimming, skiing, golf, and tennis. I want to go back to Ford's time at Michigan, because people might say, why is Gerald Ford number one? Why isn't Teddy Roosevelt number one? It's not only Ford's skill as a footballer, but his character. And we're going to talk about a game against Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Where Willis Ward, who was the first person of color to play college football in, I think it was almost 40 years.
Yeah.
And he was on Michigan. And Georgia Tech said that they would not play the game if Michigan played Willis Ward.
The racist Georgia Tech team.
Yeah, and Ford threatened to walk. He threatened to quit the team if they didn't play him. Michigan decided to back down, but Ford, after a personal talk with Willis Ward, who asked him to play.
Yeah.
Despite that, he played.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's a
he stood up.
It's a brave stand to take.
That's a very brave stand.
1934.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that really says a lot about Gerald Ford's character as a human being as well as an athlete. So,
yeah. Oh, I think he's
all around.
Yeah. I think he's number one on the list because he had offers to play in the NFL.
Yeah.
This president, legitimately could have been a professional athlete.
Right.
Although this was, like the pre-Super Bowl era, I don't think playing in the NFL wasn't
that would be 30 years later, but still
as lucrative a prospect as it is today.
You still have legendary footballers from that era.
Yeah, he was top world class.
Yeah, Ford was a top-notch footballer and remains so. And I have seen the footage of when his body was flown back to Ann Arbor and the band, the Michigan band, was there and played Hail to the Victors as they brought him off the plane. It was pretty awesome.
It's a proud Wolverine to the last.
Absolutely. Go blue, bleed blue and maize for the rest of your days. Jerry Ford, our number one presidential athlete.
Our sixth president, John Quincy Adams, not known for his athletic prowess, but you'll find out everything that he is known for when we dive into his life right after this word from our sponsors.
Spoiler alert, it's going to be interesting because he was actually more physically fit than you'd think, and in terms of intellectual prowess, unsurpassed among our nation's chief executives. Don't go away. You're going to want to stick around for this.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Jay Scott's Book and Fashionable Hat Store. Taste and Fashion. Jay Scott begs leave to inform his friends and the public generally that he still continues to receive at his Book and Fashionable Hat Store a full supply of men's and boys' fur hats of the latest fashions and of very superior colors and qualities, which he will dispose of at reduced prices. Jay Scott also has on hand an assortment of white and drab hats suitable for the summer season. Nice. Listeners, do you like to read? Do you like stylish headwear? Well, then J. Scott's Book and Fashionable Hat Store is a one-stop shop.
I was just going to say yes and yes.
You'll stand out from the crowd and shine far brighter than your illiterate, bareheaded compatriots. Taste and fashion in one convenient location. That's J. Scott's Book and Fashionable Hat Store. Get down there today.
Do yourself a favor. Now an important message from our sponsor, Rachel Wallace. I do forewarn all persons from trading with my husband Wallace or harboring him. As he has left my bed and board without provocation, I will not pay any of his contracts. I caution all persons trading with the said Wallace, particularly the whiskey sellers, for he will not pay any of his contracts. He will do nothing but get drunk, poke about, tell lies, and make mischief. Listeners, you've been warned. Steer clear of Rachel Wallace's good-for-nothing drunkard of a husband. This stumbling lush brings trouble everywhere he goes, as his long-suffering wife can attest. Sadly. Most of all, don't believe him when he says he'll give you $1 tomorrow for a whiskey today. That's the oldest lie in the book, James. Avoid this equivocating inebriate at all costs. That's a message from our sponsor, Rachel Wallace.
Now an important message from our sponsor, Charles Yates. Whereas my wife, Emily Yates, has left my bed and board without any just cause, and previous to leaving did break and destroy my watch, cupboard, and furniture, and cut into pieces my quilts, sheets, feather bed, shirts, coat, and pantaloons, and threw out to the hogs my flour, bacon, and meal.
Holy shit!
This notice is therefore to forewarn all persons from trusting her on my account, as I am determined to pay no debts of her contracting.
Well, she just went apeshit, James.
Yeah. Listeners, Emily Yates has left her husband and on her way out the door wantonly destroyed all of his stuff for no reason whatsoever, without any just cause. Now, there could be another side to this story, but Charles Yates is the one who paid for an ad on our show, so we're taking his side.
That's right.
One might think that a husband would have to have done something untoward to provoke that kind of outburst in a wife. But the money in our pocket says no, this bitch is just stone cold crazy.
Crazy.
That's our sponsor, Charles Yates' story, and we're sticking to it.
That's right.
If you want to buy an ad on our show to accuse your significant other of gratuitous injustice, hit us up on Twitter at DeadPresPodcast, where you can find out more about our sponsors and see their original ads published in newspapers during John Quincy Adams' presidency.
And we're back. It's episode 6 of the Dead Presidents Podcast. We're beginning a new era in presidential leadership.
Our 6th president, John Quincy Adams. The first 5 presidents of the revolutionary generation, now the sons of the revolution, literally. At least in John Quincy Adams' case.
That's it. The only one that had a kid, his son, president.
Yep.
And nothing to do with familial connection, really. Nothing to do with like any type of monarchical thing. This cat was his own man.
Yeah, I don't think
he made his own way, and my God, what a journey!
What a life! The revolution part of his childhood. He was born July 11th, 1767, in Braintree, Massachusetts. That would make him just about turning 9 years old, a week after his dad got the Declaration of Independence passed.
Yeah.
We usually start off the podcast with a brief encapsulation of the parents of the president. See episode 2.
Yeah, that's all you
for
need
an
to do.
entire episode about
there's a whole
his
episode
father.
on it. You don't
Obviously,
need to,
his
that's
father.
all you need to know is right there.
His father, obviously a towering figure in American history, and in his own life, big shoes for him to fill.
Yeah, and we'll have a link to that episode if you want to stop the podcast now and listen to that episode and then come back.
Yeah, you start from the beginning of the podcast run.
Yeah, you should.
Also, you know, his mother, Abigail Adams, a very formidable woman, sometimes, you know, almost overbearing as a mother with high standards for her son to live up to.
Yeah.
He was their eldest son. He had an older sister, but he was the oldest boy. He was a brilliant and precocious youth. His childhood was exciting. At age 8, he and his mother watched the Battle of Bunker Hill take place from a distant hilltop.
Can you imagine?
War breaking out in his own backyard, almost literally.
Yeah, that's just wild.
Yeah, so his father was taken away on political business and legal business. He was the man of the house, John Quincy was. And they lived in fear of a British attack, perhaps being taken as hostages even. For their father was...
Not exactly a cozy situation.
Yeah, their father was a high-ranking potential traitor. That's how George III might have seen him.
Absolutely. And speaking of his father, as you know from our second episode, he spent much of the Revolution as a diplomat in France and the Netherlands. And he took John Quincy with him.
Yeah, he spent the ages of 10 to 17 in Europe. He had one brief visit home, but he spent his whole teenage years practically
overseas
in Europe. He was educated at the Passy Academy in Paris and Leiden University in the Netherlands, schools which were much more prestigious than any in the United States.
Absolutely.
Including Harvard,
which
was still just a little small upstart college.
Yeah, at that time, you have to remember these European universities, and that was where it's at.
Yeah.
I mean, Harvard, they probably scoffed at initially, you know.
Well, John Quincy Adams would ultimately come back to Harvard and kind of scoff at Harvard considering where he had been.
True.
It was a
story.
Kind of a step down for him.
True story. But he's over there. He's learning languages and the classics. And, I mean, he is a brilliant mind. I mean, we're talking probably the best intellect of any president.
Perhaps, yeah. You know, his father, very educated and into the classics. His son follows in his footsteps, gets high standards from his parents, and also has high standards for himself.
Yeah.
Studies pretty hard.
That's the thing. We know as much about him as we could want to know because he wrote it all down himself.
Yeah. He kept a diary from his childhood for the rest of his life. And we have a lot of access to his most inmost thoughts.
Absolutely. And let's just touch on his personality, his character, before we delve into the pre-presidential career, which was pretty epic.
And the best source on John Quincy Adams' personality is John Quincy Adams.
Yeah, fortunately, there are extensive writings. I think it's the Library of America did a 2-volume edition of John Quincy Adams' abridged diaries, and it is a fantastic read. So this is John Quincy Adams in summation of himself. I am a man of reserved, cold, austere, and forbidding manners. My political adversaries say a gloomy misanthropist, and my personal enemies an unsocial savage. With a knowledge of the actual defect in my character, I have not the pliability to reform it. I never was, and never shall be, what is commonly termed a popular man, being as little qualified by nature, education, or habit for the arts of a courtier, as I am desirous of being courted by others. I am certainly not intentionally repulsive in my manners and deportment, and in my public station I never made myself inaccessible to any human being. But I have no powers of fascination, none of the honey which the profligate proverb says is the true flycatcher. that is pretty insightful. I mean, that's really open and honest self-assessment.
Yeah, a guy practiced in self-reflection.
We don't have that kind of thing from many other presidents.
Well, at least not to public knowledge.
Right.
But yeah, John Quincy Adams, like I read the biography of him, and it's like goes through his diary, like he's constantly like castigating himself for not like meeting his goals.
Yeah.
Like he wants like
set these goals for himself, and then they would be beyond what any
to be
average human being would consider.
To like get up at 5 a.m. and read Cicero all day.
Yeah.
And then if he is, at a party the night before and has a couple too many drinks, he'll be beating himself up about it in his diary the next day.
Yeah, he was really quite a character. And like I said before, I think he is legitimate genius.
Yeah.
I think Jefferson would be the closest, but I think JQA had him in terms of
he's
just sheer intellect.
He was, a poet and wanted a literary career for himself. But, as a teenager in Europe with his father, he spoke fluent French. He became so used to speaking French that he became more comfortable in French than English for a time.
Yeah, because this is a kid. Mm-hmm. This is a kid coming up.
By the time he left Europe, he spoke Latin, Greek, French, Dutch, and Spanish, in addition to English.
And that's before he's 14.
Yeah, at the age of 14, he was appointed as secretary to Francis Dana, who was becoming U.S. minister to Russia. French was the language of international diplomacy throughout Europe, so that's what you had to know to be a diplomat in the Russian court. And young John Quincy Adams already getting a job in government at just 14.
Right, and knowing him, he probably started learning Russian too.
Mm-hmm.
I almost guarantee he did. I mean, my God, we'll get to it later on, but that library in there, and I know that that's probably more him than his father.
Yeah. Yeah, but just think of all the places he saw as just a young boy. You think...
Before kids are able to drive today, this dude...
Now kids have driver's license, and they also get to fly all over the world for vacations, but back in the day of a ship and a horse and buggy... John Quincy Adams going all the way to St. Petersburg, Russia, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, he has literally spent more time overseas than in his country of origin.
Yeah, practically. When he ends up leaving Russia to rejoin his father in the Netherlands, he takes his sweet time getting back, goes through a little frolic through Finland, Sweden, Germany, spends 5 months kind of wandering around, taking his time getting back to his dad, seeing the sights. He loved going to the theater in Europe, meeting all kinds of new people, seeing beautiful ladies of all nationalities, going to parties. No other American his age was more well-traveled and worldly.
No, I mean he was. I mean, I just can't even imagine that kind of exposure at that age to come up like that. My
you're
God.
Just a young boy, and then all of a sudden there's a revolution, and your dad is one of the leaders of it. You're going to Europe, going to all the different courts of
and in the
kings
name of it,
and empresses.
He's working.
Yeah.
He's not just getting shuffled around as some hapless punk kid. I mean, he's serious.
He's making a name for himself already.
Yes,
he
is.
By the time he was getting ready to leave Europe, his mother, Abigail Adams, was worried that he was going to become too worldly and lose the austere New England values she was instilling in him.
Yeah.
So by 1785, Abigail was happy to have John Quincy back in the United States and enrolled at Harvard.
And he shows up and he's like, Harvard, what?
Yeah, he has kind of an inflated sense of his self-importance because he's been out there kind of participating in the revolution, doing his own part, with all the major players.
Right.
And he thinks of himself as kind of a big deal. When he gets back to Harvard, they're not treating him like a big deal.
He has an inflated sense of self, but I would argue that it is justified.
Yeah, it turned out, I guess, to be justified.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, I think it's like Ali.
Yeah.
He was allowed. Mm-hmm. He was allowed the trash talk.
Yeah, but he's a little bit miffed when he has to come to Harvard and kind of prove himself to the faculty of Harvard when he was at Leiden University.
Yeah. So
Leiden University way outclasses Harvard at this time.
Yeah, I mean, he feels like it's a downgrade.
Yeah.
But, the folks at Harvard don't think that.
He settled in and excelled in his studies. In 1787, he graduated second in a class of 51, gave a well-received commencement oration. He wrote poetry, had dreams of, a literary career and becoming a writer, but to make a living, he was constrained to follow in his father's footsteps in a legal career.
Yeah, that seemed just the most practical move.
Yeah, with his, towering intellect, he was, of course, well-talented enough to study law, but he really wasn't into it.
Yeah.
He chafed under his studies. At this time, he had courtships with a couple young ladies. He was on the verge of proposing to Mary Fraser, but his parents, especially his mother, were against him marrying until he had established himself in a career and could support a family. So he reluctantly broke off that romance.
It would prove to be the right decision.
Yeah, that's kind of the same thing his father did.
Yeah.
Gritting his teeth and keeping it in his pants for years until he can support a family. Yeah. In 1790, he was admitted to the bar and opened a law office, but still, not really into the practice, didn't make too much money. He didn't really want to be a lawyer, but he needed to be independent and support himself.
Yeah.
So
I think that's another point of his character is he felt the need to make his own path.
Yeah, especially
did not want to rely on his parents.
Yeah, because his father was, kind of famous. He didn't just want to be his father's son. He wanted to be his own man. He
wanted to be his own person. By God, he pulled it off.
Yeah, he didn't want to be a lawyer, but luckily he didn't have to stay one for too long because in 1794, President George Washington appointed him U.S. Minister to the Netherlands. This isn't just because his dad was the vice president. No, it's because John Quincy Adams has diplomatic experience as a teenager. He's probably one of only a few Americans who had ever been to the Netherlands and spoke the language.
What an impressive specimen of a human being. And I mean, George Washington himself is like, this is a great choice.
Yeah, he had also John Quincy had written some essays in the newspaper in favor of administration policies, and Washington approved.
Yeah, they were pretty well received.
So he got to quit being a lawyer and headed over to the Netherlands, where his main duty was to monitor the U.S. repayment of loans his father had negotiated during the Revolution.
Interestingly enough.
Those were important loans.
Very much so.
Yeah. He also became the United States' chief source of news on the French Revolution after France ejected the U.S. minister to France during the period when that revolution was becoming increasingly bloody.
Yeah. It was turning into a mess over there.
Yeah, and it was John Quincy's dispatches that kept the U.S. government apprised of what was going on.
Yeah. That's pretty impressive, because he's still a young man.
Yep. He's going on about to turn 30 years old. And that's when he finally gets to end his celibate lifestyle.
That's right.
As Minister of the Netherlands, he spent a lot of time also in London. He was a frequent dinner guest of Joshua Johnson, a merchant who was U.S. consul in London. Johnson happened to have 2 lovely daughters.
Hubba, hubba.
John Quincy found himself enamored of the young, beautiful Louisa Johnson. She was 22 and he was 30, and, yep, he was ready to leave the bachelor's life behind.
Yeah, it's time.
Her mother was British. Louisa grew up in Britain, and so she was, not an American.
Right.
And this fact did not really thrill John Quincy's parents.
Yeah.
But
Caused a bit of a stink.
At this point, he was done taking romance advice from them, and he married Louisa in London in 1797. She was the only foreign-born first lady until Melania Trump.
Pretty wild fact.
Louisa was often sickly and plagued by migraines and fainting spells. She had several miscarriages, gave birth to 3 sons in 1801, 03, and 07. She sometimes felt that John Quincy was too cold and insensitive, felt he cared a little bit more about studying the classics than paying attention to her.
Yeah.
On his 14th wedding anniversary, John Quincy wrote in his diary, "Our union has not been without its trials." He acknowledged many differences of sentiment, of tastes, and of opinions with regard to domestic economy and to the education of children between us. But he added, "She has always been a faithful and affectionate wife, and a careful, tender, indulgent, and watchful mother to our children."
Yeah, I guess no marriage could be perfect.
No. But they had
did
a
all right.
lifelong partnership.
Yeah. It's going to bring us up to right around the same time of his marriage. President Washington, again, throwing out for JQA.
Yeah.
This time, minister to Portugal.
But,
However,
yeah.
he gets some word before this happens.
Yeah, before he heads over to Portugal for his new assignment, he gets word that there's a new president.
And it's his dad.
It's his dad. And
he's not going to be minister to Portugal anymore.
President Dad has appointed him minister to Prussia instead.
Yeah. How about that?
And John Quincy's not happy about this because he didn't want to get an appointment from his father. Even though...
He was totally, he feared, okay, this is going to look like nepotism.
Yeah, he doesn't want that. And
I've been making my own name. Don't fuck it up, Dad. I don't need your favors.
Yeah, so he didn't really like this at all, but he felt like he couldn't refuse without causing a stink because there was nobody else on the scene in Europe to take the job.
And was there a precedent yet for somebody refusing a position from the president?
Maybe there might be people who decline because they don't want to serve, but this,
it would have been like
not for this kind of reason
at this time, because Washington, most people aren't going to turn down Washington.
Yeah,
it might have been like an early kind of
but particularly this would have been. This might have caused a stink because of the reason that he didn't want it.
Uh-huh.
But he went along anyway, and he went to Prussia, negotiated a commercial treaty there. After his father's presidency, he came back to the United States, got himself elected senator from Massachusetts.
Yeah. And this is a guy with a fierce independent streak.
Yeah.
So he's a Federalist.
Yeah, his dad was
nominally.
His dad was Federalist president. Of course he's a Federalist. The Federalists are the ones who voted for him and put him in office. But he doesn't get there very long before he starts proving himself to be very independent.
He's the original maverick.
Yep. He was the only Federalist in Congress who supported the Louisiana Purchase. Keep in mind, the guy who's president now is the guy who just whipped his dad's ass in a sometimes contentious election that John Adams did not attend Jefferson's inaugural.
We're talking, it was a dirty campaign.
But John Quincy will side with Thomas Jefferson when he thinks he's right.
Exactly. He is an independent mind, if anything. I mean, he just he absolutely exemplifies the idea of an independent spirit.
Yeah, most Federalists saw the Louisiana Purchase as a big new territory that would be dominated by Republicans and further diminish their already diminishing influence. But John Quincy, took a broader view. He saw the long-term benefit for the nation of Western expansion. He also... one of his biggest accomplishments in the Senate, he led the opposition against a proposed treaty with Britain to settle the boundary between Canada and the western part of the United States.
Right.
And this treaty, it would have given to Britain the northern parts of what are now the states of Washington, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota.
Yeah.
And John Quincy Adams, spoke out against this treaty and got it defeated.
Yeah.
He would later...
That's going to come into play later.
Yeah, he'd later revisit this issue 15 years later when he was Secretary of State. So he, he was siding increasingly with the Jeffersonian Republicans after his 6-year term. The Federalists who elected him felt he was a little too friendly.
He was getting a little too cozy.
And they did
with
not...
the opposition.
They did not reelect him for a second term.
Their loss.
Well, that's the...
And it's not JQA's loss because, he pretty much immediately gets named U.S. Minister to Russia by the new president, James Madison.
Yeah. He's proven himself to be independent and competent, also has a lot of diplomatic experience.
And he goes over there and he does a pretty good job for himself. Yeah,
he became pretty close with Tsar Alexander.
And this is Alexander the First.
Yeah, the leader of Russia. He became really close with John Quincy Adams.
And for you fans of Russian history, Alexander the First, Alexander the Third was the father of Tsar Nicholas II, who was the last of the Russian emperors.
This will be about
the Tsars.
100 years left on the Tsar ship at this point.
Just a little tidbit.
Yeah, John Quincy, he got some neutral shipping rights for the U.S. with Russia during the time when the war between Napoleonic France and the whole rest of Europe was threatening U.S. trade with everybody.
Yeah, it's a sticky situation.
Mm-hmm. John Quincy, he was also in Russia during Napoleon's epic 1812 invasion of Russia, sent back vivid reports to the United States. Once again, our
when
chief foreign correspondent.
It's like the legitimate news.
When the French are killing a lot of people, it's John Quincy Adams who's telling the United States about it. It's also during the War of 1812 when he's over there. He got Tsar Alexander to agree to try to mediate a peace between the U.S. and Britain. That didn't really come to anything, but President Madison appointed John Quincy to a diplomatic commission alongside Henry Clay and Albert Gallatin, some heavy hitters.
Yeah.
They went to negotiate the Treaty of Ghent to end the War of 1812.
Pretty big stuff.
Yep.
And, the War of 1812 sometimes is referred to as the Second War for Independence. We established ourselves as an independent nation, and this was our first defense of it, really.
Yeah, we had to reassert our independence from Britain.
Exactly. So tough times. And,
Well,
so how about this coincidence? The aftermath of the war paralleled the First War of Independence, in that the first post-war U.S. minister to Britain was an Adams.
yep.
You had John Adams going over to meet George III, and we discussed that in episode 2. Very impressive. And
Yep.
now his son.
The first post-war minister to Britain.
And, you know, this was an even... I mean, if the relationship was frayed after that, when John Adams went over, this was really something. I mean, they had raised the Capitol and the White House.
Yeah.
It was a full-scale invasion.
But John Quincy's right there, reknitting the relationship back together. He negotiated a commercial convention and began discussions on some issues that he would soon resolve in our favor in his next job.
That's right.
For the newly installed fifth president, James Monroe, named John Quincy Adams to the top cabinet post of Secretary of State.
And you could see this is like a natural climb, a natural political climb to the presidency at this point. It really looks as such, because outside of the vice president, the Secretary of State was the most important position.
Yeah, that's how Madison and Monroe had both been Secretary of State before they stepped up to the presidency.
And you look at John Quincy Adams from Monroe, from his mind, who better? My God, a brilliant foreign minister.
Yeah, nobody had more foreign policy or diplomatic experience.
No, bar none. I mean, he was hands down just in his own league.
Yeah, also, he's widely respected across the aisle. And, we talked about in the Monroe episode the end of the first two-party system
Right.
after the War of 1812. And I think John Quincy Adams' appointment as Secretary of State really exemplifies that.
It absolutely does.
He was the son of the last Federalist president who was bitterly opposed by Jeffersonian Republicans, and now he's the top cabinet minister for the latest heir of the Jeffersonian dynasty.
That's it. Pretty wild. And that again, I keep harping back to this, but my God, John Quincy Adams' character and his intellect and his tact is pretty much unsurpassed.
Yeah, he would become one of the most successful and accomplished secretaries of state in American history.
Yeah.
Like, I think his record, at least as of the time he served, far and away was the greatest Secretary of State yet. Over all the previous, including Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all been Secretaries of State. None of them accomplished as much as John Quincy Adams did. He negotiated treaties with Britain to gain fishing rights for the United States, to demilitarize the Great Lakes region, and to fix the U.S.-Canada border at a much more favorable line than the 1803 proposed treaty that he opposed as his senator.
Yeah.
He also negotiated the Adams-Onís Treaty with Spain, by which Spain sold Florida to the United States and settled the 15-year controversy over the boundary between Louisiana and Spanish Texas.
Yeah, that had been broiling for some time.
Yeah, there was almost a war in 1806 over that, and everyone was salty about that for a long time. It finally got resolved.
Yeah. And not a moment too soon, really.
No.
Because we were in a weakened position, and that could have started another fucking war.
Yeah, I mean, it almost did. By this time, Yeah, it's probably the last time that you could have negotiated the border of Texas with Spain, because Mexican Revolution is kind of occurring at the same time.
Coming up.
Spain's no longer to have jurisdiction over Mexico and Texas.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads to the next big accomplishment of John Quincy Adams' Secretary of State tenure, which
is huge.
The Monroe Doctrine, which we talked about, obviously, during the Monroe episode.
Right.
It was kind of John Quincy Adams' brainchild.
It really was.
At least he was the one doing the legwork on it. To remind you, the Monroe Doctrine was our declaration that the Western Hemisphere is an American sphere of influence and is off limits to new colonization efforts by European powers. Spanish colonies in Mexico and South America had achieved their independence. We want to keep it that way.
Right.
We don't want Spain coming back to try to take them back over. Also, Britain also doesn't want Spain coming back, because Britain is establishing commercial ties with these new nations.
That's it. Yeah. So from a tactical standpoint, they don't want to see that happen.
No, and there was talk to have a joint declaration of the U.S. and Britain to keep other people out. But John Quincy Adams was against that. He didn't want to be, teaming up with Britain or make it seem like we're depending on Britain for this.
Again, an independent cast of mind.
Yeah, he argued in favor of a unilateral declaration.
Right.
And Monroe agreed with them and got to put his name on the doctrine.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yep. And that's, this distinguished record that he's building, John Quincy as Secretary of State, is going to do him in good stead when it comes to the election of 1824.
Yeah.
This is the first election since the party system has, collapsed in a way. And this time, for the first time in 24 years, there's no Virginia dynasty heir ready to take over. So it's not going to be Virginia anymore. It's going to be wide open.
Right.
And there's no parties nominating somebody anymore. So it's kind of a free-for-all.
And we really get like a nice little hodgepodge of candidates, don't we?
Yeah, some of John Quincy's fellow cabinet secretaries had been jockeying for years for this, including Treasury Secretary William Crawford of Georgia.
Yeah.
War Secretary John C. Calhoun of South Carolina was kind of aiming for it for a while, but he ended up deciding to shoot for the vice presidency instead.
Right.
Also in the mix, House Speaker Henry Clay of Kentucky.
For it. And we got an up-and-comer.
War hero.
We got an up-and-coming, in the mold of Washington type figure.
A war hero, General Andrew Jackson of Tennessee.
And we talked a little bit about him in the Monroe episode in regards to Florida.
Yeah,
in that situation down there.
He took the campaign that helped convince Spain to let go. Yeah. He's a bit of a firebrand and a maverick of his own.
But he was a fan favorite.
He was. John Quincy Adams had his own supporters. In Massachusetts, they formally nominated him for the presidency. A Massachusetts delegation did. And now, this election wasn't necessarily about, policy differences.
Not so much.
It was more...
This is a super unique election and one of the most important elections. I don't know if maybe we'll have a top 5 most important elections or I don't know, something about something in regards to the popular vote, maybe in the top 5.
Yeah, this was the first.
This is the one that started it all.
Yeah, it was the first of a new era of elections, and this election also really influenced how the next election was going to go.
Absolutely,
because somebody ends up not being happy about how this election turns out.
That's right.
And this election.
Well, this is the first time we have the popular vote.
Yeah, at least for a contested election.
Yeah.
You know, previously it had been the state legislatures which had allocated a state's electoral votes.
Exactly.
More and more states have changed the rules so that the popular vote will determine the electoral votes.
Right.
And this is the first election that really comes into play. And so this election, it ends up being more about, I think, sectional rivalries. It's not going to be Virginia anymore. So every other part of the country wants their favorite son to be the next president.
Exactly.
And it's a four-way race. And this is how this is the results of the voting. Popular vote: Andrew Jackson 42%, John Quincy Adams 32%, Clay 13%, Crawford 13%. Within the Electoral College, it's Jackson 99, Adams 84, Crawford 41, Clay 37.
So no one has a majority in the Electoral College.
Yep, that means the House of Representatives has to choose.
And who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives? None other than Henry Clay,
yeah, the
presidential candidate.
Well, the House, here's the thing, though. The House has to choose between the top 3 electoral vote getters, and Henry Clay was 4th. So
Right.
He's on the outside of that. But he now has he has all of his supporters who can then, go to another candidate, and also, as Speaker of the House, has unparalleled influence over this process.
Yeah. It also didn't help that William Crawford suffered a stroke.
Yeah, between the election and the House vote,
And
William
he pretty
Crawford,
much,
he stroked himself out of the running.
Yeah, he pretty much was incapacitated out of the running.
So between Jackson and Adams, Henry Clay likes John Quincy.
Difference.
He chooses John Quincy and throws his support behind him, which allows John Quincy to narrowly win on the first ballot. So even though he did not get the most votes, John Quincy Adams wins the election.
Yeah, but it's an awkward way to, what was supposed to be the culmination of his life's work, It began in the worst manner that you could imagine.
Yeah, he kind of backs into it without a popular mandate, and with Andrew Jackson and his supporters, who got the most votes, kind of pissed.
Oh, they're bloody miffed.
They're pissed they didn't get it, and that saltiness
feel
is
like
only going to get
been
worse.
Robbed. They feel that there was a corrupt bargain.
Yeah, that's going to be an impression that John Quincy will create with one of his first acts as president. We're going to get into the...
Yeah, you're going to want to stick around because this is going to develop, and it might cripple JQA's presidency before it begins. You won't want to miss this follow-up.
We're going to dive...
After a moment. From our sponsors.
We're going to dive into the presidency after these messages.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by A.W. Barnum, owner of one of the most celebrated thoroughbred stud horses of the age, who has an incredible offer that we're beyond excited to share with our mare-owning listeners. In compliance with the wishes of many friends who have, for the last 5 years, ably supported me in my attempts to improve the breed of horses in this country, I have concluded to let Cock of the Rock stand one more season, and to reduce the price of his services from $20 to $10 for each mare put to him. I hope my motives for doing so may not be misconstrued. Listeners, A.W. Barnum's not in this for the money. He's just trying to enhance the quality of the American horse breed by generously spreading the genes of Cock of the Rock, a stallion of unparalleled grace and power. Cock of the Rock is in high demand and could command prohibitive prices for his stud services, but the magnanimous A.W. Barnum is practically giving it away at the insanely low 50% off price of only $10 for a mere sawbuck. Cock of the Rock will impregnate your mare with an extraordinary thoroughbred foal that will be the pride of your stable for years to come.
Listeners, we're not just blowing smoke up your ass. Cock of the Rock is no ordinary equine, but a proven champion.
That's right.
He and his offspring have been dominating the racing circuit for some time now. To give you a little taste of what you're in for with a Cock of the Rock sired horse of your own, here's a first-hand report from the Port Kent races. A gentleman who was present at the races which took place at Port Kent on the 17th and 18th instant informs us that Mr. Colden's horse Crabstick, Mr. Brinkerhoff's horse Don Juan, and Mr. Barnum's horse Cock of the Rock contended for the first day's purse. They went off from the score in fine style for about 400 yards when a dog came in contact with Don Juan and threw him and his rider. Cock of the Rock took the lead and kept it, running with great ease to the winning post. Obviously, listeners, the Port Kent racetrack is not as well managed as our one-time sponsor, the South Carolina Jockey Club, where all dogs found on the track are immediately killed.
That's the South Carolina Jockey Club guarantee.
But Cock of the Rock would never let himself get tripped up by some stray mutt.
No.
That dog incident did lead to a rematch, and we'll give you one guess how that turned out.
Here we are from fact, listeners.
The friends of Don Juan, in consequence of the accident on the first day, were desirous of testing his speed and proposed to match him against Cock of the Rock again. The proposition was accepted by Mr. Barnum. A lively interest was taken in this race by the friends of the two horses, and there was a great diversity of opinion. Soon after they started, Cock of the Rock took the lead and kept it with much ease, coming in 40 yards ahead. Don Juan was withdrawn, and Cock of the Rock, of course, took the purse.
Maybe he was still worried about a dog running on the course.
Listeners, not only is Cock of the Rock a champion, he begets champions. Here's the report from day 2 at the Port Kent races. On the second day, Mr. John Howard's filly Slut, sired by Cock of the Rock, Mr. Newton Hayes's filly Lady of the Lake, sired by Cock of the Rock, and Mr. Barnum's colt Shamrock, sired by, you guessed it, Cock of the Rock, were entered for 1 mile heats. They went off from the score at full speed, Slut taking the lead, followed close by Lady of the Lake. The race was interesting and somewhat doubtful for the first 3 quarters, but for the last quarter, Slut showed her superiority and came in 10 yards ahead with ease. In the second heat, Slut took the lead from the score and kept it. These 3 offspring of Cock of the Rock comprised the entire field. At day 2 of the Port Kent races, no other horses even dared to compete.
Isn't that something?
It is.
My goodness. Listeners, we can't overstate how incredible this opportunity is for your mares, but you have to act fast. Cock of the Rock will not be allowed to cover more than 3 mares in any one day, and will be limited to 60 for the whole season. Get in there while you can, because those lucky mares are going to be thoroughly satisfied customers.
That's a Cock of the Rock guarantee.
As an added bonus, A.W. Barnum's Split Rock and Shamrock, both sired by Cock of the Rock, will stand at his stables and be let to a few mares at $5 each. So if you can't get your mare in with Cock of the Rock, you could get the next best thing for an even lower price. If your mare foals a colt of this immaculate bloodline, it won't be long before people are paying you to have their mares covered. And if your mare foals a filly, she could easily become a prize-winning racer like Slut. Who wouldn't want a little slut of their own? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what you get with Cock of the Rock. This has been a message from our sponsor, A.W. Barnum.
And we're back, diving into the presidency of John Quincy Adams.
So we're starting off with a stain
he starts off, he hamstrings himself.
This is a terrible way to begin the presidency for one who's, the culmination, what was supposed to be the crowning glory of his career, has now become muddled. And there's kind of there's a dark spot on it. And it would become known as the corrupt bargain. It's a follow-up to the election of 1824.
One of John Quincy's first acts as president was to name his cabinet. For Secretary of State, he appointed Henry Clay.
Yeah.
And it was Clay's support that won Adams the election. And to some people, particularly Andrew Jackson supporters, this appointment looks like a quid pro quo.
Right.
Secretary of State was the stepping stone to the presidency. The last 3 presidents came directly from Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So this almost makes it look like
they are rightfully miffed.
Clay, you gave me the presidency. I'm going to set you up to be next president. That's what Andrew Jackson supporters think it looks like.
And it seems they have justification for their thoughts.
Yeah. It's a very bad look.
Yeah, from their standpoint, I mean, it definitely looks like something went down.
Jackson's supporters portray it as, a cabal of elite politicians conspiring against the popular will, against the man of the people, Andrew Jackson.
Right.
In reality, there was no, actual, bargain. Clay just...
No, not necessarily, no. I mean, did Clay deserve that position? Yeah.
Yeah, he was very powerful. He had diplomatic
he was a natural choice.
Experience.
It looked really bad.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and think about Jackson's standpoint, too.
So, Clay, he just genuinely favored Adams over Jackson, and Adams genuinely wanted Clay as the Secretary of State. There wasn't some backroom cigar smoke filled deal where Adams is like, "I'll name you Secretary of State if you give me the House votes to win presidency."
He laughed and shook hands.
But that is sure what it looked like to people on the outside.
Yeah, in Jackson's opinion, that's what he saw.
Even if Clay was, technically the best man for the job, maybe Adams should have known that this wasn't going to play well politically.
Yeah, that's it. They set them. It just was a setup for failure from the beginning, and unfortunately, and I mean it, unfortunately, John Quincy Adams' presidency was mired in just this hopeless bog of not being able to do any of the things that he wanted to do. This whole corrupt bargain thing had, unfortunately, set up his own failure. And it would also contribute to the fact that he would lose in the next election. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it became the biggest issue in the next election.
Yeah. And,
this in combination with the fact that he didn't get the most votes.
Yeah, and that was unprecedented at the time.
Congress has, a lot of people. The
guy that is the president didn't get the most votes. That's the first time that happened, and that fueled Jackson's fire because he got the people on his side.
Yeah, and he has there's a lot of congressmen who incline more towards, a states' rights conservative.
Yeah, view. Obviously the entirety of the South.
Yeah, so John Quincy Adams, he comes in with an ambitious agenda.
Yeah, that's for sure. You can't say that John Quincy Adams, despite entering the presidency in a pretty awkward manner, he had a serious plan. He had a really ambitious agenda that he wanted. It's almost mind-boggling, and a lot of it seems really decent.
Yeah, a lot of it is stuff that would continue to be the agenda of the Whig Party.
Exactly.
Particularly with Henry Clay's leadership after Adams' presidency, and a lot of things that would
And that says something too,
eventually
in terms of the corrupt bargain thing is just it's politics.
Yeah, they were on the same page ideologically, and it was natural that he'd want Clay as the Secretary of State.
And like that's another thing that it's just a bloody shame that so great an intellect, somebody that really deserved to be president and like had these ideas, got, it just, the way that he entered into it just spoiled the whole thing. It's really a travesty. It's really sad. It's hard, because he really didn't get a shot and he deserved it.
Yeah, he really spent kind of 4 years being denied his agenda.
Yeah. And what a hell of an agenda. Let's dive into that. Mm-hmm. I mean, starting with the State of the Union address.
Yeah, his first State of the Union, he laid it out. He wants to establish a national university, a naval academy, a national astronomical observatory, a national bankruptcy law, uniform system of weights and measures. He has once increased internal improvements, proposing to use the proceeds of Western land sales, not increase taxes or new debt, to finance new roads, canals, infrastructure projects, all aimed at an integrated national economy.
So that's a huge agenda, and it sounds good. It really does.
Yeah, but most of these things they don't make it through Congress. A lot of them never even get to a vote.
Right. Not even considered.
The states' rights crowd, then the narrow, those who have a narrow view of the Constitution as to what the central government ought to do. Reminder that both Madison and Monroe, as president, vetoed bills for internal improvements on the grounds that they were unconstitutional as infringing on the state's prerogatives.
What would become termed pork barrel.
Yeah. Things that aren't the federal government's business, according to a powerful faction that's powerful enough to really keep John Quincy Adams from getting this stuff done.
Right.
Underlying this, some in the South, a fear that a more powerful federal government will eventually become a threat to the institution of slavery.
Yeah. It's been creeping up. It continues to creep up. This is the cancer in the American body.
Yep.
That continues to spread and become more and more.
Yeah, and it doesn't really rear its head directly during Adams' presidency, but it underlies the limited government view of the South.
Yeah.
John Quincy, he did get some of the internal improvements projects. He did get through. He was actually able to do a couple. Yeah, these
that were like pretty good.
Yeah, these sound like big accomplishments. They extended the national road, the Cumberland Road, from Cumberland, Maryland, up into Ohio. They got the Chesapeake, Ohio Canal and the Chesapeake, Delaware Canal, as well as the Louisville Canal, which goes around the falls of the Ohio at Louisville.
Yeah.
And the first passenger railroad in the country, the Baltimore and Ohio, built during John Quincy Adams' administration.
Pretty huge. Yep. Still a thing, the Baltimore and Ohio.
Some of these are private projects, but the federal government is providing land and money for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, perhaps they saw that, despite the fact that they were virulently against him politically, it's like, well, that sounds like that's probably a winner.
Yeah, some of these
of an idea, but it's just winners. Too bad that they didn't at least attempt some of these things that could have been game changers,
Yeah.
It would take
some time.
I look at it almost as an Athens and Sparta. thing.
Yeah.
You know? We didn't go the intellectual route.
Yeah, it took, it would be more time before these things come around.
Yeah. That's it.
Really had more of a view that would become, he's just mired in the pre-Civil War South views that are blocking him.
Yeah.
That later these things would be more accepted.
Well, I mean, John Quincy Adams was a foreign policy master in his pre-presidency. So, why don't we talk about his foreign policy a little bit? What was John Quincy Adams' foreign policy? This foreign policy master from a teenager, coming from that standpoint, what's he going to do in terms of foreign policy?
There's not necessarily any big foreign policy crises during his presidency.
Right.
He's mostly focused on expanding international trade and negotiating commercial reciprocity agreements with a lot of different countries, including Prussia, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, Central America, Hawaii, and Tahiti.
Nice.
Tried to get trade open with the British West Indies, but couldn't come to an agreement. Along the lines of, the Monroe Doctrine and the newly independent, former Spanish colonies of South America.
Yeah.
In 1826, there was the Panama Conference, or the Panama Congress, which was a conference of North and South American countries meant to establish closer relations and cooperation.
That's a pretty big deal for America to get involved in that.
Well, John Quincy Adams thought so, and he wanted the United States to participate. Some of his opponents, not too enamored
Not too
of it.
fond of it.
They favored a more isolationist policy and were particularly afraid that the conference might become a venue for condemning slavery. Southerners didn't want to be a part of a conference that included Haiti, which was a nation founded on a slave revolt, that Southerners were still terrified of the Haitian Revolution happening literally in their own backyards and wanted nothing to do with that. So eventually U.S. delegates did get appointed to the Congress, but the opponents had dragged their feet long enough that our delegates couldn't even get there by the time the Congress ended.
That is something, isn't it?
That's a pretty clear encapsulation of how John Quincy Adams is being held back by his opponents not being able to do shit.
That's going to bring us to, this is always a topic that bothers me, but we're going to talk about Native American relations and a little bit of a contradiction within John Quincy Adams' character in that I think he did legitimately want good relations with the Native Americans, but at the same time, he did favor westward expansion.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's, in a way, that's kind of what everybody wanted. Everybody, in theory, wants to get along with the Indians.
Yeah.
But they also want to expand westward, and that's where the Indians live, and that is inevitably going to create friction.
Exactly.
I think we're probably...
And that's kind of ironic, and it's going to come up in his post-presidential career.
Yeah.
Westward expansion and his thoughts on that.
And I think particularly...
Because there's going to be a little bit of a shift.
Mm-hmm.
He feels, at this time, that it's justified. But a couple years down the road, spoiler alert, he's not so keen on it.
Well, yeah, it depends on the
tactic, I suppose, is his rationale.
But when it comes to the Native Americans, and this is an issue that I think we're going to be talking about in depth in our next episode with Andrew Jackson. But during Adams' presidency, just a little bit of a a precursor to the full-blown Indian removal policy of the Jackson administration. In 1825, a treaty is concluded with the Muskogee Creeks, whereby they agree to cede all of their land in Georgia and to remove themselves west of the Mississippi. But it turned out that the Creek chiefs who signed this treaty didn't have the broader support of their tribe, and they actually executed some of those chiefs because alienating tribal land was considered a capital crime. So the Creeks then petitioned Adams to suspend his treaty, and there was a big uproar over it, and eventually he did agree to suspend the treaty. A new treaty was negotiated whereby the Creeks gave up most of their land, but not all of it, and they didn't have to move west of the Mississippi.
What was that, the Great Doozy of 1827?
The deal of the century.
Yeah.
But the original treaty had been very popular in Georgia, and a lot of people were pissed that Adams and the federal government backed off of it. And this event really helped set the stage for full-blown Indian removal during the next presidential administration. And that's, it's a real tough issue, and we're going to be delving deeply into it next episode.
Blemish. It's a cancer, much akin to slavery. It's just a cancer on the body American. Just two horrible diseases.
Another big event during Adams' presidency that will have
future ramification.
Yeah, another big controversy during Jackson's presidency.
Yep.
The tariff of 1828.
Yeah, this one. I mentioned the word doozy before. Well, this one was a doozy.
It is.
It was a doozy of a tariff.
John Quincy and many Northerners favored high tariffs on foreign manufactured goods because that would benefit U.S. manufacturing, which was centered mostly in the North.
Exactly.
But the South hated this because it forced them to pay more for manufactured goods.
Yeah.
And it made it harder to export cotton.
Yeah, so they're justifiably pissed.
This is a very, slavery is a very sectional issue. The tariff is also a very intensely sectional issue.
Well, they look at it from the standpoint of money. They're not factoring in that they have human lives enslaved. It's like, hey, this is going to fuck us up.
They're thinking about their wallets.
We got to have our money so we could have a mint julep on the front porch with Mammy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the North and South both thinking about their wallets as to the tariff. And then for the second half of John Quincy Adams' term, in the election of 1826, more of his opponents come into Congress.
Right.
So Congress is even worse for him in his second half. And they have this tariff bill up, and, the more Jacksonian wing of Congress, led by future President Martin Van Buren, is going to try to kill the tariff bill by including additional tariffs on raw materials. The North wants to tariff manufactured goods. Van Buren's going to put in tariffs on the raw materials that are necessary for the northern U.S. to manufacture their goods. So the North doesn't like this aspect of the tariff bill.
Yeah.
And Van Buren and his boys think that they'll kill it by putting this poison pill in the bill.
Exactly.
But it turns out that
that's a clever little scheme. That's a clever little scheme he concocted.
Theoretically.
Old Van Buren.
But it turned out that the Northerners voted for it anyway. So the tariff passed, even though it has a bunch of shit that nobody likes in it.
And what was it known as?
The Tariff of Abominations.
My goodness.
And just a little preview of our next episode. Within a few years, this will lead to the nullification crisis.
Right.
Whereby John C. Calhoun and the Southerners claim the state right to nullify federal laws that they don't like, and they will purport to invalidate the tariff, which will lead to an epic showdown with Andrew Jackson.
There's going to be a showdown.
Suffice to say, though, this tariff didn't help increase John Quincy Adams'
That's just it.
Limited popularity.
Poor guy, literally a genius with a brilliant pre-presidential career.
He was president at the wrong time.
He deserved to be president, and he deserved to have a good presidency, and by God, he didn't get it. And it just, that tarnish of the corrupt bargain ruined his presidency, and he spent a miserable 4 years.
That brings us to the 1828 election, and it's no surprise who his opponent is.
That's it. Andy Jackson's back, and this time he's out for blood, by God.
He's been basically running for this election since the day the first one ended.
Yeah,
and Jackson
is going to get down and dirty. 1828, one of the filthiest campaigns.
Yeah.
If you thought 1800 was bad, wait till you
not
get
even
a
close
glimpse at 1828.
Yeah, I think this is definitely the nastiest election until at least modern times.
I agree with that totally. I mean, I think we got a little bit more civilized after this, because this was outright savage.
A lot of personal attacks. Jackson supporters...
And brutal ones at that.
Jackson supporters painted John Quincy as an out-of-touch elitist. They hammered away at the corrupt bargain. They also accused him of procuring prostitutes for the Tsar when he was minister to Russia.
Yeah.
Calling him a pimp, basically.
Yeah.
In turn, John Quincy supporters lambasted Jackson for his participation in duels. He had killed at least one man at a duel.
Yes.
He summarily executed some men during his Florida military campaign.
Yeah.
They went after him for slave trading, and most distressingly to Jackson, attacked his wife, Rachel Jackson.
This actually caused a casualty. This was a casualty of a campaign, really.
The most fatal personal attack in presidential campaign.
It's a campaign casualty. Like,
Rachel's
literally killed her.
Rachel's divorce from her first husband had not been technically finalized when she married Jackson, and so she was called an adulteress and a bigamist. Jackson took this very personally.
Very personal.
And it turned out that Rachel ended up dying shortly after the election, and Jackson felt it was because of this stress.
He outright thought that Henry Clay and people of that ilk had murdered his wife.
The winds are not blown in John Quincy's direction. His vice president, John C. Calhoun, defected to run as Jackson's vice presidential running mate.
Yeah.
Senator Van Buren led the New York State political machine to support Jackson.
Van Buren was, we're talking about new generation coming up. Van Buren was the legitimate intellect behind what became the Democratic Party. Martin Van Buren created the Democratic Party, essentially.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this kind of cat coming up. Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, Martin Van Buren. These cats are going to change history.
It's going to be Jackson presiding over it because he wins the popular vote, 56 to 44%, and wins the Electoral College 178 to 87. John Quincy Adams ignominiously not reelected.
Right.
He was a little salty about his defeat.
Takes the Adams precedent.
Once again following in his father's footsteps and not attending his successor's inauguration.
Yep. 2 times in history that we saw the Adams precedent.
If you elect an Adams, that's what you're getting. Don't expect attendance at the next inauguration.
we are going to take a little break, but we have a special found ad. And this is really something. This is deep and mind-boggling. I've come across a real series of ads from the election of 1828, and we're going to read through them before we go to our actual sponsored ads. And then we'll be back with John Quincy Adams post-presidency. Thanks for listening. And now, special commercial advertisements from the election of 1828. John Quincy Adams, advertisement number 1.
The country needs John Quincy Adams in 1828 because the president's mansion is no place for an ignorant ruffian and scoundrel.
Advertisement for Andrew Jackson, number 1. The country needs Andrew Jackson in 1828, a heroic, common man of the people, because the president's mansion is no place for a crooked, low-down cheat. John Quincy Adams, advertisement number 2.
Andrew Jackson is a vastly unintelligent would-be military tyrant. He is a heartless gambler and teetotaler, a cold-blooded murderer, and a savage racist with the interests of white Southern landowning men exclusively as his sole focus.
Andrew Jackson, advertisement number 2. John Quincy Adams is a short, pudgy, heinous criminal of the basest sort. He is a pompous, aristocratic thief who stole the position he holds and bears no rightful claim to it. John Quincy Adams, advertisement number 3.
Andrew Jackson's wife is an adulterous harlot. Jackson himself is a vindictive and frustrated madman driven to rage by the fact that he is both impotent and sterile and cannot father an unholy brood with his whore wife.
Andrew Jackson, advertisement number 3. John Quincy Adams is a loathsome, balding, repulsive, wrinkly, hermaphroditical blight of a creature that can scarcely be considered a human being. As minister to Russia, he pimped young American girls to the Tsar. He is a vain and detestable outlaw and a bumbling, ineffective, and treasonable dog. These real advertisements from the election of 1828 are brought to you in part by our podcast sponsors, whom we go to now.
The Dead President's Podcast is brought to you in part by Robert Payne, who has this important message. To hunters. Whereas a great many persons are in the habit of frequenting my plantation with dogs and guns every day of the week, not excepting the Sabbath, to my no small annoyance, and whereas several hogs and 6 sheep have been killed on my premises by dogs thus introduced, I requested that I may not be so much molested, and forewarn all persons who have valuable dogs that I shall certainly have killed indiscriminately every straggling dog found on my premises. There you have it, listeners. The popular hunting spot on Robert Payne's plantation is officially off limits. Look, we all knew we were trespassing, and we got away with it for a while, but some of our dogs got a little aggressive. I'm not saying it was my dogs that killed all 6 of those sheep, but what dog doesn't love mutton?
Most of them favor it.
We here at the Dead President's Podcast love our dogs, and Robert Payne has openly vowed to kill them indiscriminately, so let's think about finding a new hunting spot. This has been a warning from our sponsor, Robert Payne.
Thank you, Robert. We now have 2 messages that tell a very similar and very sad story. First, our sponsor, Roger McGraw, publishes this notice. Whereas my wife, Sally McGraw, has left my bed and board and has also been guilty of the most notorious adulterous practices, I hereby forewarn all persons from giving credit to said Sally, as I am determined to discharge none of her contracts. Now, our sponsor, James Birmingham. Whereas Peggy, my wife, has left my bed and board without just cause or provocation, and has otherwise conducted herself in a scandalous manner, in violation of her marriage contract and of decency, I hereby forbid all persons harboring or trusting her on my account, as I will pay no debts of her contracting after this date. Listeners, as you know, this is an all too common tale. Despite the sanctity of the marriage vow, despite the sixth commandment of the Lord our God, some two-timing wives just keep slutting it up, and their poor cuckolded husbands are forced to publish their shame by buying ads on our show just to avoid having foot the bill for these insatiable whores of Babylon. What is to be done? If you have any idea, please tell our unfortunate sponsors, Roger McGraw and James Birmingham.
There's no better time for a message from our sponsor, Union Academy for Young Ladies. It is announced that Miss McLeod and her niece, Lade of New York, have taken an interest in the Young Ladies Academy in this place. The Academy, under its new organization, will go into operation on the 1st of the ensuing October with every convenience for the comfortable accommodation of boarders. The boarders will be under the immediate charge of Miss McLeod, who will give every attention to their general deportment and the cultivation of genteel manners. The internal regulations will be mild but efficient, and the strictest decorum rigidly maintained. Pupils for admittance must at least be able to read. If we here at the Dead Presidents Podcast can be sure of one thing, it's that Sally McGraw and Peggy Birmingham never attended the Union Academy for Young Ladies.
Facts.
That's a shame, because Miss McLeod would have taught them genteel manners.
That's right.
And how to conduct themselves with a ladylike deportment. In that case, they certainly would not have grown up to be the notorious adulteresses they are today. Union Academy girls have class. Listeners, if you send your daughter to Miss McLeod, we guarantee that her future husband won't be publicizing her scandalous indecency on a future episode of this podcast.
That's a promise.
That's a message from our sponsor, Union Academy for Young Ladies.
Thank you, ladies. And we're back, and we're ready to dive into the post-presidency of John Quincy Adams. This was going to begin tragically, because we had some family turbulence.
Yeah, John Quincy Adams had 3 sons, George Washington Adams, John Adams II, and Charles Francis Adams. The first 2 of these sons ended up causing John Quincy a lot of grief.
They did.
John Adams II had been expelled from Harvard for participating in a student riot. John Quincy made him a White House aide, and he got into a brawl with a journalist who had criticized his father. In 1828, John Adams II married cousin Mary Helen, who was a young woman John Quincy had taken into his home after her parents died. However, all 3 of John Quincy Adams' sons had become rivals for her affection, and George and Charles refused to attend the wedding.
That sounds like it could be a good movie.
Yeah. A little bit of a romantic comedy.
Yeah, that could be a good film. Who would be in that?
Might be a little.
Let us know online.
Yeah.
Who
Send
would
us.
be in that
Send
film?
us your dream cast.
Yeah. What is your dream cast for this? This is a movie waiting to happen. I mean,
Although
as I'm talking, Netflix has greenlit it.
let's not be too quick to call it a comedy though. That was 1828.
It might be a serious, like, intellectual picture.
Towards the end
comedy.
of 1828, George Washington Adams, who, by the way, John Adams and Abigail Adams, not too thrilled that John Quincy Adams named his first son after George Washington and not after his illustrious father.
Yeah, I'm sure that kind of smarted.
But they probably didn't end up ultimately minding, considering the historical reputation that George Washington Adams earned himself.
Yeah.
He was an alcoholic who ran up huge debts that his father was forced to bail him out of. In 1828, just after his younger brother married the cousin that he wanted to get with, George Washington Adams impregnated a chambermaid and had a child out of wedlock. He descended deeper and deeper into alcoholism and suffered from paranoid hallucinations. In April 1829, just a month after his father left the presidency, George was on a steamship to New York when he appeared to be delusional and accused other passengers of conspiring against him. He either fell or jumped overboard.
Or he was murdered.
In any event, his body washed up in Long Island Sound 6 weeks later. He left notes indicating his intent to kill himself. Consensus seemed to be that he committed suicide. George's death helped propel John Adams II deeper into alcoholism. His health failed and he died suddenly in 1834. Charles Francis Adams was the lone bright spot. He pursued a literary career, held a series of public offices in the Massachusetts state legislature, the U.S. House of Representatives, and became the third-generation Adams to serve as U.S. Minister to Britain.
Pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome. That's
But,
it.
You know, it seems like, wow, he had such a turbulent presidency. What's he going to do? He's done. His future rests in his kids, and it's like that hadn't worked out too awesome during his lifetime there. But
That's the thing.
there is a huge turnaround.
He's not done.
He is not nearly done, and in fact, he goes on to what I would argue is the greatest post-presidential career in history.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
1 year after he leaves the White House, he's elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He's the only former president to serve in the House. I mean, if he was nursing a bruised ego, that was the ointment that cured it.
Yeah, it showed people still appreciated him.
But, like, his whole thing was to be, maybe he sought respect in his own right. And he was a dude that, like, was legitimately trying to do shit and got denied it.
Yeah.
And kind of was made to look like a horse's ass. And now, suddenly, he's elected to the House. So, that restores that fire.
Yeah,
It probably hadn't really dimmed in the first place, but if there was any thought of it waning, total turnaround with this.
Yeah, he had unfinished business, and he didn't want to be retired. He would end up serving the final 17 years of his life in the House of Representatives, and it turned out to be some of the most important and distinguished service of his already long and distinguished career.
I would argue it was. Like, that was his absolute testament. He was a giant of the House. Just monumental.
Mm-hmm. The, an issue we talked about on past episodes, 4 of our first 5 presidents were slave owners, and the one who was not, John Adams, didn't, take on the issue of slavery in his public career. For the first whole generation, under the new Constitution, there was
swept under the rug.
It was an unspoken agreement that slavery was not to be a federal issue and wouldn't be spoken of in the federal government. Now, we had the Missouri Compromise during Monroe's term where that kind of first started to rear its head. And by the time John Quincy Adams is in the House, anti-slavery sentiment is on the rise.
Big time.
And the House is inundated with petitions that are critical of slavery.
Right.
So in an attempt to preserve this federal silence, the House adopted the so-called gag rule.
Right.
Where all petitions critical of slavery would be immediately tabled without debate.
Who was the Speaker of the House during that time? Do you know?
I'm not sure. But this was over...
It was James K. Polk.
Oh, it was Polk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Episode 11, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
This is clash between a former and future president.
Yeah.
See, but John Quincy Adams, he wasn't a fan of this. He thought it was against, first of all, the right to petition the government, and also his abolitionist views. And he openly defied the gag rule. He read anti-slavery petitions into the congressional record repeatedly. He would ridicule members who were afraid to discuss this issue and didn't want it to be an issue. He became one of the most visible abolitionists in the country and really brought attention to the cause in the federal government during a time when they were desperately trying to keep it off the table as an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it, as you said, episode 11. John Quincy Adams had some pretty acerbic words to say about James K. Polk.
You see, he clashed with Polk as a House Speaker and as president.
As president, yeah.
In 1844, John Quincy made the motion in the House that finally ended the gag rule. He won that fight over the gag rule. Also in 1839, Africans aboard the Spanish slave ship Amistad mutinied and took over the ship, later landing in New York. The Spanish wanted to re-enslave them, but John Quincy Adams successfully argued before the United States Supreme Court that they should remain free.
And that whole incident was based on an Anthony Hopkins film.
Oh, yeah? John Quincy Adams
yeah.
took inspiration from Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, pretty much.
And lived it out in his own life.
Yeah.
Not to get...
All joking aside.
not to get your hopes up too much about abolitionism yet at this point in our nation's history. John Quincy Adams has a well-earned reputation as an anti-slavery advocate, but to throw a little cold water on it, John Quincy Adams, a longtime theater goer, big fan of William Shakespeare.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's a huge intellectual. I mean, of course, he's versed in so many things. Shakespeare was probably something he would have read in kindergarten, you know, today.
To shed a little light on his views, here is an opinion he expressed about Shakespeare's Othello, in which black Othello marries white Desdemona, eventually murdering her on the false belief that she was cheating on him. John Quincy Adams once wrote, "The great lesson of the tragedy of Othello is that black and white blood cannot be intermingled in marriage without a gross violation of the laws of nature."
Oh, my God.
He said, while it was true that Desdemona had not betrayed Othello, she had betrayed the laws which govern her class, her sex, and her race. Quote, "And when she is smothered in bed, the thought always occurs to me that she deserves her fate."
Jesus Christ.
I guess that just goes to show even the most ardent abolitionists would still hold deeply racist views.
Yeah, I wouldn't have argued that, but oh my God.
Being against slavery doesn't necessarily
what bothers
mean
me the most is
you're
this
for
guy was
black
a fucking
equality.
genius.
Yeah.
And he had that thought. That sounds like something an idiot would say.
Well,
That's what he takes from Othello?
I guess.
Come on.
Well,
that's insane.
Slavery, one thing. Miscegenation, not. John Quincy Adams definitely not ready for that.
Damn, I don't know. That bums me out.
So,
but
don't want to.
Let's try not to sour the mood too much. Let's turn around to a pretty big achievement. The Smithsonian Institution.
The millionaire James Smithson died, bequeathing $500,000 to the United States for the establishment of an institution to disseminate knowledge.
Pretty much what Adams had wanted during his presidency with the National University. So this was his kind of like follow-up chance to have something.
Yeah,
just for knowledge for everybody, you know.
He took charge in helping to establish that institution and to resist efforts to misappropriate that money for other more pork-barrelly type purposes. He helped see the Smithsonian Institution into existence, that we can now all enjoy the many museums in our nation's capital.
That's right. And boy, do we have some great memories of that.
Indeed. Speaking of, as we did, clashes with James K. Polk.
Coming back again.
In 1844, John Quincy opposed U.S. annexation of Texas, and a couple years later opposed the Mexican-American War, where earlier he had favored Western expansion.
Yeah, we did bring this up earlier. I did make a point to say that, he had favored westward expansion, but he looked at Polk and saw a wannabe tyrant bullying a weaker nation for the sole purpose of expansion of slavery. That's what he saw. In his mind, that's what Polk was doing.
Yeah, that's probably not how Polk thought of it, but
No, it's not.
John Quincy Adams, somewhat far-sighted at least in being able to see that all this territory in the Southwest, which it
was going to cause a problem,
that we're going to take off Mexico, is going to be a slavery issue, because the South is going to want to expand slavery into the territory. And
and we'll talk about it in episode 11. That's Polk's biggest character flaw, is his inability to recognize the threat that lay at hand for what he had done. It was a huge accomplishment, but with huge and just inexplicably terrible consequences.
Yeah, there wasn't
It would lead to hundreds of thousands of lives lost. In the end.
There was an attempted amendment in Congress called the Wilmot Proviso that sought to ban slavery in the territories that were ceded by Mexico to the United States. John Quincy Adams supported that amendment. It didn't pass, but it was a opening salvo in the issue of slavery in these territories and on the broader issue of the life and death of slavery in the United States.
Was it. This was the moment that it was okay. This is going to come to a head one way or the other.
Yeah, one of the many big escalations towards civil war.
I think this was the first move in the political chess game that was going to erupt into the Civil War.
And John Quincy Adams opposed the Mexican-American War all the way to the end. He was actually in the process of opposing it on the House floor on February 21st, 1848, when he collapsed. As an 80-year-old, you may recall episode 5, we recounted John Quincy's death in detail when he earned his spot at number 1 on the top 5 presidential last words.
That's right.
He collapsed on the House floor, still hard at work, fighting for what he believed in. Was taken to the Speaker's private chamber where he lingered for 2 more days.
Yeah.
Before he died, he said the prize-winning number 1 presidential last words, "This is the last of Earth. I am composed."
Solid.
And he
A
went...
solid life. I mean, really. I think he got it was a raw deal as president. But
Yeah.
he, by God, he made up for it with his career.
Yeah,
in the
very,
House.
very
Super
distinguished.
Distinguished.
He
member of the House.
really...
Historically monumental.
He had a great reputation throughout his whole House career, really built himself up, recovered from what could have been a bad reputation if he just left it at his somewhat unsuccessful presidency.
Yeah.
Kept fighting to the bitter end.
Absolutely.
Died the way he lived.
Literally to the end. Shouting no. In opposition.
Voting against a seemingly benign resolution to congratulate troops
Veterans
on their
of the
Mexican-American War.
Yeah.
He was against the war at its core, and so wasn't going to vote for that kind of thing. And with his last act, kept opposing it. And remained...
Just hardcore. And you want to talk about a presidential intellect minus the Othello assessment. We talked about going to Peacefield in episode 2 of the podcast, and we brought up the library.
Yeah, the John Quincy Adams library.
Structure of its own, a 2-story structure of its own, of stone.
Built separate from the house so that it will not catch on fire.
Yeah.
Because it houses a shitload of books.
Yeah.
Thousands
2
and
stories
thousands.
full of books and of every...
To see, like...
every kind you could imagine in multiple languages. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's Greek books, there's French books, there's German books.
It's like a physical manifestation of John Quincy Adams' brain in a huge 2-story building.
Yeah.
As book lovers, it's a
That's
really,
why that Othello thing
really
hurt
incredible
so bad.
thing.
My God.
But yeah, highly recommend in the Boston area, check out the homes of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, and especially that library.
Just to reiterate, that was my personal favorite of all of our presidential home visits and tours. That was just such an awesome experience, despite literally everything else. Like, I couldn't get a fucking steak and egg sandwich at the restaurant, and the lady gave me shit. And,
that was an unorganized trip.
yeah. Well,
we embarked on that trip.
That's a story in and of itself.
We
might have a bonus episode just about our presidential trips. Maybe an extended top 5.
Yeah, that was a
Or
poor
something of presidential trips.
We embarked on that
we
trip
could tell the stories of
with
them
a poor
you've,
plan.
You've got glimpses, but
We mentioned that we peed on the tree in Harvard Yard. Unplanned, but classic moment.
classic move.
In the prehistory of the podcast.
Yeah. I think we had it in mind. That perhaps that planted the fertile seed that sprouted into what is now your favorite podcast, the Dead Presidents Podcast.
Indeed. If you're interested in further reading on John Quincy Adams, I could recommend the biography by Paul C. Nagel.
I own one by Marie Hecht, I believe is pronounced. That is stellar. It's from the I think it's the American Political Biography series. I have a lot of those, and those are the best scholarly biographies on just about everybody. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, like the Ron Charnow Washington book and Grant book, McCullough's book on Adams and Truman. But great series. Yeah, they do really good shit, and that's a good one. As I mentioned before, get that diary.
Yeah.
Just get that 2-volume Library of America abridged diary. It's beyond fascinating. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, read John Quincy Adams' diary and then start one of your own.
Yeah.
So that when you accomplish historical deeds one day,
your loved ones will burn it without looking at it.
Or a podcast can talk about you and
keep your memory
know
alive.
your inmost thoughts.
Yeah, there we go.
Another also further reading plug that we should have made on previous episodes. There's on the internet, it's called Founders Online, that has the complete correspondence of a lot of the founding fathers: Washington, John Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, Franklin, and I think John Jay.
All the
their
big
complete
guns.
Correspondence is digitized on Founders Online.
Yeah.
These are like
so worth checking out.
dozens and dozens of printed volumes worth of their letters and writings. You can
all
look up for free at the click of a button. Go to
That's
Founders
it.
Online.
And my goodness, some fascinating reading in there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could really kill a lot of dead time at work.
Very
checking
interesting
that out.
things. Like you'll go in to see. Let's see what some of the big issues of Thomas Jefferson's presidency were. And if you look at letters, you'll see a bunch of just random ass people sending him letters like with sob stories begging him for charity money and stuff. Like all kind of weird
there's so many things.
Yeah, the history books that you read or that we read or that all this stuff we say in the podcast comes from are all based on these primary sources of their original letters and writings. And it's really interesting to go right to the source and look at them. So
it sure is.
That's highly recommended.
That's available to everybody for free.
Yeah, for the first major founders on Founders Online.
Founders Online. Check it out. You're not going to be disappointed you did. Well, I think we're down to the wire here on episode 6, and I think it's time for a summation.
Yeah.
John Quincy Adams. We dare not speak on him.
Yeah, we don't want to presume to make the last word, as our custom on the podcast is to turn the last word over to the contemporaries of our president.
Exactly.
So we have some quotes.
Shall I begin?
Sure.
It is said he is a disgusting man to do business, coarse, dirty, and clownish in his address, and stiff and abstracted in his opinions, which are drawn from books exclusively. That was a comment by future President William Henry Harrison.
Probably not as enamored.
Famed general.
Not as enamored of the library that we were.
Not too into that library.
A little too bookish for William Henry Harrison's standards. Our next quote.
That's kind of scathing, actually.
Yeah.
William Henry Harrison called John Quincy Adams coarse and dirty and clownish.
Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion.
I reckon so.
Here's an opinion. The best guy you can get an opinion from at this time.
Yeah.
In 1797, when he was still a young diplomat, President George Washington said of John Quincy, "Mr. Adams is the most valuable public character we have abroad. There remains no doubt in my mind that he will prove himself to be the ablest of all our diplomatic corps." A prophetic statement from George Washington.
Absolutely. Like, Washington knew who to back, right?
Definitely.
And lastly, we'll finish up with a statement from Henry Clay. I have found in him, since I have been associated with him in the executive government, as little to censure and condemn as I could have expected in any man.
John Quincy Adams, relatively spotless in Henry Clay's opinion.
Indeed. And that's gonna bring us to the end of this, our 6th episode. As always, we're gonna close with a little song.
A little ditty.
By what has to be, at this point, your favorite band as well as ours, the Constitutionalists. We're going to close the show with John Quincy Adams. Thanks for listening.
Hey, yo, that beat's cooked up. JQA, grab the mic. Yo, JQA. JQA, grab the mic. Yeah, now spit that fire. It's going down. JQA on the track. And on the attack.
Men wants but little here below, no wants that little long. It's not with me exactly so, but it's so in the song. I want so many, and if told would muster many a score. And were each wish of men to go, I still should long for more. What first I want is daily bread and canvas backs and wine. And all the realms of nature spread before me when I dine. 4 courses scarcely can provide my appetite to quell. With 4 choice hooks from France beside me, dress my dinner well. What next I wanted briefly cost is elegant attire. Black sable furs for winter's frost and silk for summer's fire. And cashmere shawls and Brussels lace, my bosom's front to deck. And diamond rings, my hands to grace and rubies for my neck. I want who does not want a wife, affectionate and fair, to solace all the woes of life and all its joys to share. Of temper sweet, of yielding will, of firm yet passive mind. With all my bones to love me still with sentiments refined. And as time's car incessant runs and fortune fills my store, I want of daughters and of sons from 8 to half a score. I want a lasting mortal, there's such bliss on earth to crave, that all the girls be chaste and fair, the boys all wise and brave. I want a warm and faithful friend to cheer the adverse hour, who ne'er to flatter will descend or bend in need of power. A friend to chide me when I'm wrong, my inmost soul to see, and that my friendship prove is strong for him, this is for me. I want the seals of power and place the ensigns of command, charged by the people's unbought grace to rule my native land. Nor crown nor scepter would I ask, but from my country's will, by day by night to ply the task of public bliss to fill. I want the voice of honest praise to follow me behind, and to be thought in future days the friend of humankind. And after ages as they rise exalted may proclaim, in choral union to the skies their blessings on my name. These are the wants of mortal man, I cannot want them long, for life itself is but a span and earthly gifts a song. My last great one absorbing always went beneath the sod, and summoned to my final call the mercy of my God.
My God. JQA, motherfucker. 6th president, motherfucker. Then he was in the house, motherfucker. Roll that shit, light that shit, smoky.